Welcome to $100 Million Blueprint. We're your hosts, Jonathan Ferrari and Neil Cuggy, the founders of Goodfood. Whether you're scaling your own business, leading a growing team, or just curious about what it takes to build something big, this podcast's for you.
In each episode, we sit down with the brightest minds in business to discuss the real secrets to scaling. No fluff, no corporate jargon, just actionable advice that works. We share lessons learned from being owners and co-owners in businesses valued over $290 million.
Today, we're diving deep with an incredible guest who's got a track record of growing a business from the ground up. This is $100 Million Blueprint. Welcome to $100 Million Blueprint, the podcast where we uncover how elite businesses scale while staying true to their values. Today, we're exploring the world of Fintech and the innovative strategies behind one of the companies that's reshaping how Canadians think about credit and financial tools. Our guest today is Andrew Graham, the co-founder and CEO of Borrowell. Under Andrew's leadership, Borrowell has become one of Canada's largest fintech companies, helping over 3 million Canadians manage their credit and make smart financial decisions. From navigating the complex world of financial services to pioneering the concept of free credit scores, Andrew's journey is one of resilience, innovation, and strategic growth. Andrew, welcome to the show.
It is great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So the place we thought we would jump in to start the conversation is to hear a little bit about the origin story behind Borrowell.
Sure, my pleasure. I was working at a mid-sized bank and got to know the world of consumer finance from that side of the fence. And one of the things that struck me in my job was how profitable the credit card team was. I was running a different part of the business, and I was struck every quarter at how successful the credit card team was in producing stellar growth and stellar profitability. I didn't think they were working necessarily harder than we were or, had better talent. And as I dug into it, I discovered that, credit cards, if you run a credit card business well, it can be a very, very profitable and successful business. And one of the reasons for that is that many consumers, even consumers who have very good credit, choose to carry debt on their credit cards or carry a balance month after month. And I'm sure many of us who are listening, have done that from time to time and for good reason. But it turns out it's not the most efficient way to carry debt. And, people end up paying 20+% interest for that debt when they might even have a line of credit available where they could go get a line of credit at a much, much lower rate. So I was sort of super intrigued by the fact that there's $100 billion of credit card debt in Canada, much of it held by people with really good credit. And so when you see an inefficiency of that scale and size, I think, anyone with sort of an entrepreneurial bone in their body would be like, how can we try to go at that problem and, come up with a better outcome for consumers and also build a big business?
Amazing. And what were you thinking originally as the monetization strategy?
Yeah, so the original go-to-market for Borrowell was a low-cost loan. So we found a bank partner, EQ Bank, that worked with us on the underwriting model to decide who could get, who would qualify and who wouldn't and at what rates, and provided some of that important seed capital. And we ultimately did about $100 million of loans intended for people with credit card debt to be able to refinance that at a lower rate or to avoid taking credit card debt in the first place. So, imagine someone who wants to do renovate a bathroom or a kitchen and needs a $20,000 or $30,000 loan, rather than going to Home Depot or whatever and putting all that on your credit card. Get a loan from us and pay a much lower rate of interest, and ultimately save money over the life of paying that back versus what you would pay on a credit card. So that was the original go-to-market product, and we launched that in 2015. It's been 10 years since we launched that product. I would say it sort of worked is the answer. We actually were able to build a lending business with that worked from we didn't have large losses, which is really important in an early stage lending business. That part of the business performed well. We were actually able to attract a lot of capital. There's lots of banks and lenders out there that want access to prime consumer debt, and so it was never hard to find capital actually to fund those loans. What was hard was actually on the consumer side. We'd have a lot of people apply, and only a low percentage would actually qualify. Like less than 20% of people applying would qualify. And you guys have experience running a consumer business. just think how tough it is, to get a consumer to look at your product and apply. Man, that takes a lot of work. And then imagine having to turn away 80% of those people because you decide that they're not a fit for your product. So, that's such a painful experience for an early company and for employees and founders, that ultimately we decided that this was not going to work on its own. So what we did was we built a marketplace of other products around it. We said, well, if you don't qualify for the Borrowell loan, here are loans or credit, or credit products from other partners, who might be a fit. And then on top of that, we were able to launch the first free credit score in Canada as a way to, help consumers figure out where they are in the credit journey and, of course, discover us. And so you sort of plug that on into the, the top of the funnel, the top part of the business. We started getting a ton of leads, and we started also finding a lot of success helping people find the best financial products. And after a few years, it turned out that, only a very small percentage were actually qualifying or taking the Borrowell product. And we were sort of like, well, why are we even doing this? It's like, you sort of, imagine you start, it's like sort of you're building a supermarket to sell your own product. People come in and actually want, the other things in the shelves more. And so we ended up actually stopping that Borrowell loan product and focusing much, much more on building out a complete experience, complete sort of market experience for consumers Canadians trying to find the best financial products.
It's so interesting to hear as well. Like, as a consumer of financial products, I always think about how competitive it is, right? You have the big banks, and there's always names that start to come up pre-fintech success, I would say. But how did you see in the early days competing against some of the very well entrenched incumbents offering similar products, whether it was on the credit score side to get the lead in, or actually on the service side of the product?
Well, we were the first company of any kind in Canada to offer credit scores for free. So we got so much buzz and so much excitement when we launched that it really helped us make a name for ourselves. And I think we've really retained that leadership position in the Canadian market as the first place that many consumers turn to when they want to understand their where they are from a credit perspective. And that's, of course, so important in this country when we have so many new Canadians, people who are by definition new to credit and want help navigating that system. So I think that was always a differentiator, and certainly other companies now offer credit scores for free. I think we've really retained that leadership role, and even from like a Google search perspective, we still do very, very well. And we've continued to build. We've continued to make that service, I think, by far the best in the market. We now offer weekly refreshes of your credit score and credit report. We've put a lot of educational aspects around that to help people understand how they can improve their credit. Not just see a number. So it's actually, to my mind, been fine that there's others in the market now offering credit scores and even reports for free, because I think in many other places you kind of get a taste and you're like, oh, I didn't realize I had this thing called a credit report and I want to go deeper. And when you go deeper, there's a high probability you'll find us and we'll help you go deeper. And not only will we help you better understand, but we'll help you, then use your credit. So like, my credit score has gone up. I've worked really hard on it. Well, what products can I qualify for? Or I already have a great credit score, but what's the best travel credit card for me today? And so we help answer those questions in a way that a bank or even, other fintech companies can't, because they're never going to advertise their competitors' products, right? You're never going to go to, TD Bank and see RBC credit cards or see, accounts from other financial institutions or fintechs. We believe that for most consumers, the best thing to do is to assemble a portfolio of products from different banks and fintechs, and we really help people do that.
Amazing. And you address a lot of my questions. I was trying to think about what are users of the platform doing with access to, let's say, weekly credit scores. And it sounds like it's all in, yes, the monitoring of the credit score, but then also the ability to have, product recommendations and to be able to meet the needs of customers and users of the platform based on where their credit score is and how it's evolving. So that's super interesting. In terms of maybe to give a little bit of context to the audience, can you share? I know in our introduction we talked about 3 million plus users on the platform. That's like 10% of Canadians, which is pretty exciting. What other numbers can you share in terms of the size and scale of the platform and where you are today?
Yeah, so we, as you said, we have over 3 million Canadians who have signed up and created the Borrowell account. On a typical day, we have over 100,000 unique logins, which is also pretty exciting to sort of see that routine and repeat usage. We have over 100 employees at this point. So that's been a great growth journey, and I'm pleased to say we've been profitable for quite a few quarters now, and so that's been important in our evolution as well. So really exciting to have that scale. Maybe another way to look at it is for many of our fintech and bank partners, we are one of the largest channels for them in finding new customers, and that gives us really strong relationships. And I think over the coming years, as we continue to grow much faster than the market is growing, we really will become an even bigger and more important partner and way for Canadians to discover the best financial products for them at wherever they're at in their life.
Amazing. And maybe just to go back to what you said before around, you guys had this $100 million of loans outstanding with EQ Bank, and you had started to see a little bit of traction, but you were kind of feeling like it wasn't the product market fit that was taking off. Can you just talk through some of the conversations that you guys were having around that free credit score offer? Like, was that a tense conversation? Was it a easy thing? Was it obvious? Like, being the first of anything is usually never easy or obvious. But could you walk through that decision a little bit, Andrew? Bring us in the room.
Yeah, I think one of the hardest decisions for us early on was assessing the degree of product market fit we had with that Borrowell loan product. Because I think looking back on it, we definitely had some degree of product market fit. As I said, we were able to originate $100 million of loans. So it's not like it didn't work. And we had a lot of top of funnel interest. And by that, I mean, we had a lot of consumers, a lot of Canadians coming to our site and applying. So that's pretty exciting too. I think what's hardest when you're at the product market fit stage of a company is there's two narratives out there about successful companies. One narrative is, the first narrative is, you just got to stick with it and keep plugging away and, iterating and improving. And then finally, your product's going to be good enough and it's going to work. I think that's a narrative, and you could point to companies that have had that experience. Then there's a second narrative, and the way the second narrative goes is, we had product number one, and we pivoted, and now look how important product number two was. And you can think, the famous story of Slack starting out as a gaming company, and they built this internal chat service really to help themselves build whatever game they were building, and ultimately stopped doing the game and just pivoted to the messaging service, and the rest is history. But it's very hard when you're in the trenches in the moment to know, like, which of those two worlds am I in? Is it that I'm a quarter away from really exciting product market fit and I've got to just keep tweaking and keep iterating and keep A/B testing? Or is it that I'm in the second world where I need to pivot? And in some ways, like, weak product market fit is the worst. It's better to have no product market fit because weak product market fit can make you think that you're in that first world where you just need to do more A/B testing and more iterating. And I think when we launched Free Credit Score, which was just over a year, I guess, after we launched the lending product, the product market fit was so strong there that it really, was instructive. And I think one of the lessons that we've taken, and by the way, the reason I say that is when we first launched Free Credit Score, we were giving people only their credit score, so not their credit report or anything else. And we were only updating it once every 3 months. So you contrast that to today where we update it every week and you get your credit report and there's a lot of educational components. And even though we were only offering it the score once every 3 months, there was huge interest and huge demand. We were getting, interviews by, radio and TV. There was newspaper articles. We had tons of, consumers coming to our site without spending money on marketing. And, that taught me that if a bad version of your product doesn't generate a lot of interest, then a really good version probably isn't going to, be good enough. I think in hindsight, it's easy to say that loan product, it was never, at least not in that time, not in 2015, it was never going to be good enough to have the right kind of strong product market fit that we wanted, but we didn't realize it at the time. So I think again, my takeaway, my advice would be, if a poor version of your product isn't making people excited, it can be hard to get conviction that like another 4 quarters of iteration and A/B testing are going to somehow make it amazing.
I guess one of the most common questions that I get from entrepreneurs and folks that are earlier in their entrepreneurial journey is like, what is product market fit and how do I know I have it? So I guess part of your answer previously was, well, if it's not generating some kind of buzz, some kind of genuine media interest, that's probably one criteria to think about. What else were you looking at to understand product market fit?
I think when you look at the like an onboarding funnel, and what percentage of people who show interest in the product, then apply, and then ultimately convert, like how does that journey look? And if you're losing a big proportion of people through that funnel, that's also probably a bad sign. You want an experience, you want sort of a depth of demand that's so strong, that people are going to fight their way through your onboarding funnel, even if it's not perfect. So I think that was really important for us. And again, very striking difference between our loan product, where you put 100 people in the top and you'd get out single digit numbers out of the bottom, meaning people that would actually convert and be able to qualify and take a loan. Like that's a pretty painful experience, because when you do the math and you scale it up and you say, well, there's the total addressable market is X millions of people, like even if we have every single person apply, look at the resulting numbers, those aren't very good. So that it was that sort of thing. I think that was pretty instructive for us. Maybe there's a difference between like a mass consumer product like ours and some sort of B2B software where you only need a handful of customers to make it really big. And I think in that case, it's actually more important to have a small number who are very excited about your product. In our case, because we were sort of building a mass market consumer offering, having the large, having a large number of people show interest was really important.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it's an important distinction to apply for B2B and B2C and product-led companies, physical product versus digital product. So it's I think that's helpful for the audience for sure. Given how many Canadians use Borrowell today, you guys must be overwhelmed with data points and interesting tidbits of information across all of the different provinces and demographic profiles of the country. Can you talk a little bit about how that's been a core part of the strategy and how data and personalization has evolved from the early days of Borrowell and that kind of early product market fit that you were saying is not really, maybe it wasn't your proudest product to launch, but you still got a lot of traction on to today?
So personalization is absolutely the core of what we do and the vision for the company. When someone signs up with Borrowell, we're giving them their credit score and credit report, and they're also giving us access to that information, and we really take that trust very seriously. As we look to give advice and make recommendations, that there is a real onus on us to make that personalized, because we do have so much data about how someone's credit has, is how it is today, maybe how it's changed over time if they've been a member for, months or even years. And then also how they interact with our website or app, right? Like what are they looking at? What are they clicking on? So all of that data, we have a lot of I feel we have a real obligation to try to make, everything we do personalized. And I think that's where the sort of the stickiness comes from. And that's really what differentiates us from like a content only site. Like anyone can Google, how do I qualify for a mortgage, or how do I qualify for a loan, or like
Best travel credit card.
exactly. But none of that is personalized. And I think the opportunity we have is to sort of personalize that information. I think a great analogy is like your Netflix account. Like you can go out there and absolutely, Google what's the best movie today. But Netflix on a good day when you log in really helps you discover movies and shows that are going to be, attractive for you based on what you viewed in the past, for better or for worse. My Netflix account these days is kind of broken because my kids have started using my account to watch their shows. So I get, sort of surprising and sometimes
There's a point where you just
off
need to
recommendations.
restart a new algorithm.
Exactly. I need to somehow, declare Netflix bankruptcy and start again. My kids on their own account. So anyhow, but again, I think we've all had that experience, using Netflix where you log in and you're like, I never have heard of this show before. But it's some sort of like whatever Norwegian action film or something, depending on what you like. And you're like, this is great. This seems really interesting. And so that moment of like, this tool knows me, this company knows me, could be magical. And I think, when we get that right, it's also pretty magical. We hear from our members all the time that they've been able to improve their score using the advice that we've provided, or they discovered a product that they hadn't heard about, but actually was a great fit and met them where they were on their credit journey. As much as we have a concentrated banking system in Canada, there actually are, dozens and dozens of different companies offering credit cards, bank accounts. We have great, credit unions in this country. We have great fintech companies in this country. We have, mid-sized banks. So, a part of our job is helping people discover those products, but we need to do it in a personalized way. And, I can tell you that as much as some of my happiest moments are about personalization, my saddest moments as a CEO and founder are about failed personalization. So, to give you a couple of examples of that, occasionally we'll recommend a card and then we'll have someone apply and they won't get approved. Like that's a big fail. That's just a big fail. And it honestly breaks my heart when I read a review that says you recommended this and I didn't qualify. Like, look, it's a complicated world. We can't get it right every time, but we need to try. And that's someone who put trust in us and ultimately didn't see it rewarded. So, that's very motivating for me when I read a review like that, to sort of say we've got to work harder to use the data we have to make the best recommendations that we have. And again, we got to meet people where they are. Some people are new to credit, or they've had a negative event in their life and they're trying to improve their credit. Other people have great credit and are really just trying to optimize and say, like, I've had this one travel card for the last 5 years. What's new what's out there? What's new and what's the best deal you can offer me? So putting it all together and making it simple, making the output simple, of course, is very, very hard, and we can get into that. But when it works, that personalization is pretty magical.
You mentioned you have, 100 plus employees today. How did the evolution of the team structure occur, and how are you designing the team over time to build out those customer-facing recommendations?
So I think our evolution on the recommendation side, in the early days, you make sort of rules-based recommendations where it is a pretty simple human-derived algorithm or heuristic. So when someone who meets these criteria logs on, show this or that. And we've become much, much more sophisticated over the years. We are big users of machine learning, kind of the original AI, pre-Gen AI. And we have a number of ML machine learning models that we use to drive recommendations, to predict whether someone is going to be approved for a given product. And then those have become a lot more sophisticated over time, to answer questions like, well, given what Neil or Jonathan looked at last time they logged in, what do we show this time? So you try to make it, much more dynamic. We use email a lot to push out offers and to push out content to our members. We're always asking ourselves, how can we send fewer emails but still get the same number of opens? So let's try to get really predictive about who wants to hear from us in what way and who doesn't, and try to use again our predictive models to push that out. And in terms of the team, we have a data engineering team, we have a data analytics team, we have a data science team, And these teams all, work together with our product org and with our developers, our designers to try to make all of this, work. And in a world where, data requires, different degrees of cleaning, different degrees of standardization, a lot of work goes into building the foundations for being able to build a model. There's so much you can do before you even are able to build a model and put it into production.
What do you see as, I guess, your role as the CEO in the business in executing this product strategy? Are you very involved in the details, making decisions yourself, or do you feel like your role is more hands off?
It's a great question. I think more than anything, what I try to do is provide, I guess, more sort of strategic direction and also create a culture where the strategic direction is it's good for us and it's good for our members. The more personalized we get, like that is a true win-win. There's no point recommending a bank account or a credit card or a loan or what have you to someone who doesn't want it. That's just like a net loss and there's no winner. So personalization makes the experience better, and it also makes our financial outcomes better as a company, makes us more successful and sustainable. So I think creating that as sort of a bedrock value is really important. I think one of the things we probably struggle most with, or where we spend a lot of time debating, is what's the right mix of sort of short-term and long-term from a data project perspective. So rebuilding one of our core recommendation algorithms can take months if we're suddenly going to include a whole bunch of new data sources, and those need to be standardized and clean, for example. So trying to help the team understand the trade-offs between short-term and long-term is really important as well. So I think those are some of the ways I'm involved. I don't offer a ton of value in terms of actually building those models. I wish I did, but that's not those aren't my specific skills. We've got a terrific set of people that work across our data organization who are able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a question that Neil and I ask ourselves regularly, right? Like, how involved should we be, and what should we be doing in the product strategy? And we'll like ebb and flow. So we're very passionate about our product, right? Like, let's start there. And so we'll ebb and flow between like, we want to be in there making, like Steve Jobs level packaging decisions, right? Of like, I want this packaging versus that packaging. And then we'll go all the way to the other end of the spectrum going, all right, we need to really build up, teams and systems and machines that can continue improving without us. And, we like to think that we've found a good middle ground, but I think it depends who you ask on the team. And then it was interesting you talked about the Netflix algorithm, because we talk about that internally as well in the same way. So like for us, the perfect meal experience is, similar to a Netflix experience where you're coming on the Goodfood app or the Goodfood website. And then based on what you've previously purchased, based on some of your taste preferences, the quiz we have you fill out when you sign up, what other customers in your area might be ordering, we try to come up with recommendations for you, and then use that as well to build out new products. So this is a topic that we're very, very passionate about. And it's so interesting to hear, how you're doing it on your team and how you're building it out.
Well, I've been a Goodfood customer for many years, and I think you do a great job with those recommendations. Generally, what's recommended will please a majority of my family, which is not easy to do. So I appreciate the effort you've put into that. How do you decide, if I can just turn things around for a second, I think as a CEO, a lot about, where to go deep, versus where to leave the team. And there's been a lot of conversation in the last few months about founder mode, which is really a prescription for going deep. How do you think about where to go deep versus where to sort of take a more hands-off approach?
Guess you want me to take that one, John? Yeah, I think like John said, it's something we have updated our thoughts on very frequently over the past 10 years. Today, I think we try to make it a pull, not a push. So if there's an executive on the team or someone on the team that's having trouble making a decision, or we see that they're kind of stuck in, A, B, or C, we try to bring option, D, E, F to the table. So we'll kind of try to be a little bit more pull than push. And then in times of, high chaos, high uncertainty, high stress, we try to, make ourselves more visible, make ourselves more available, lean in a little more on certain things, and be just more present for some of those pull decisions. And ultimately, because we're so passionate about the product, and we started in our apartments, and we did everything ourselves, and we consume the product regularly. We often kind of have to hold ourselves back from leaning in too much and taking the the Legos from the team members and starting to build the stuff ourselves. And I think one of the other things that I think a lot about when leaning in versus kind of leaning out is I'm generally impatient, and I try to be more patient. It's something I try to work on and cultivate over time. And I always think I need to go faster to get this into market, get our customers happier, and that'll ultimately create a better flywheel and a better business and more prosperity for all. And so I've kind of had to say, okay, well, maybe it's not the best thing for me to lean in and push very hard and fast, because once the team has kind of absorbed what they're trying to solve, executed it well in a more sustainable fashion, it'll actually speed you up 6 months down the line versus the 2 or 3 months to launch something more quickly if you lean in more. So that's kind of how we think about it today, or at least how I spend a lot of my time thinking about it. But John and I are also very connected, and we share an office, and we're talking multiple times a day, so we kind of call each other out on when to lean in or lean out, or look at your schedule, your calendar. What are you spending time on? You're probably too in the details versus not enough. So we have a little bit of balance from that perspective as well.
Yeah, I think one of the points you touched on is in like a few years ago when we were very focused on like speed to market for everything. I think we started realizing that attainable and sustainable are two different things, and so we could launch something in 10 weeks, right? Like something amazing in 10 weeks, but then we'd realize we made compromises on how we built it out, the infrastructure we put behind it, and then it launched in week 10, and then by week 15 the whole thing is falling apart and you have to rebuild it. So that's something that's changed recently. And then the other piece I think is we've empowered our team members to just tell us when we're not being helpful. And so people were kind of scared to be like, hey, John, this is really not, I really don't need your help on this, and you're getting in the way here. I guess the first time someone told me, hey, like I really don't need your help here, I was kind of taken aback, but then I was like, that's amazing. I can just go on and do something else, right? Like I'm solicited everywhere all the time, right, by hundreds of people. So if this is something that you feel confident about and that I can just move on to the next thing, that's the greatest gift that you can give me. And so, but people were scared to say it, and so now we kind of just have that open conversation.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, and definitely an area I think a lot about in my day to day. Someone gave me the analogy of sort of like fly high but then dive deep. So spend most of your time not being involved in everything, but then pick your spots and go deep. Every once in a while, every function, periodically, just to get a better understanding of what's going on, and I think you can learn a lot by doing that. And I think it's finding that balance between giving people the autonomy to do their jobs, but then also making sure that we all have a depth of understanding of what's actually happening.
Yes, and I think that's a great analogy. Like if I think back a few years, we had an ops leader at some point that was really only capable of operating at the 30,000 foot level. And it was hard to see that was an issue, because he had really good CEO speak, right? So like every time we'd be interacting together, I'd be like, oh my God, he's on his game, right? Like he's got the plan, this is amazing. And then a few months later, I started having conversations with kind of skip levels below. And it was like, well, no, he has all these ideas up here, but when we actually get stuck and we need troubleshooting, it's kind of like, this is your problem and I'm not getting involved. Empowerment versus getting stuck at the 30,000 foot level, that's also two different things.
I agree. You don't want either. You don't want someone who's in the weeds all the time, but I think it's important, as you said, to empower your leaders and managers that you have to go deep sometimes, because you need to understand ultimately what's happening It's like if you're a general that never visits the front lines, you're not going to have a real sense of what's actually happening. I don't know. I find it can be very also sobering, like on the data front, as I've gotten, to learn more, I think it often gets a lot messier as you get closer to it. So it's easy to come on a podcast and say, wow, personalization is really important. And we've got all these smart data folks, all of which is true. But then when you actually get into it, you're like, okay, this percentage of our data is coming from this source. And actually it's not, half the time this breaks in this certain way that's outside of our control. And so we've had to kind of make this workaround that works. And you're like, oh my goodness, this is actually much more complicated and much messier than it should be. We're dealing with a situation right now where we work closely with our partners, especially our lending partners, to help us understand who's going to qualify for their products. And one of our partners we're working with right now, we've built a pretty sophisticated API where we pass anonymized data to them to help them understand, to help out, and they sort of come back to us and say, yes, this person will qualify or this person won't qualify for a product. And we spent a bunch of time building it. And it turns out that for whatever reason, there's a whole bunch of false negatives. And what I mean by that is they're telling us that a whole bunch of our users or our members won't qualify for their product. But then when those people actually apply, because we were doing testing, they do qualify. So there's something really broken there. And this project sounded great on a slide at some point, but something is actually not working well, between that API and their pre-qualification engine. And of course, it just takes you got to get people in a room from both companies to sort of say, what's breaking here? And then let's try to figure it out. So it's, the reality is never as good as it sounds in a board deck.
Mm-hmm. So we went pretty deep on the data and personalization side. I think the other topic of interest to our listeners is, how are you guys using AI in the business, like to build products, to run the business? How have you implemented AI to improve the business?
Yeah, so I talked a little bit but we've been users of old school pre-gen AI for a long time, so machine learning and building our own sort of large models like that. I think the advent of generative AI is just so exciting, and a huge part of my job these days is sharing my excitement and pushing everyone across the business to experiment in their own area with how AI is transforming and will continue to transform their role. Like I'm a big believer in what many CEOs have been saying in the past few months, which is to say that this really is transforming every part of what we do. And I think it'd be irresponsible of me as an employer to not be helping our team members, get up to speed. So what does that look like in reality? I mean, first of all, it's being very encouraging of people across the business to experiment in responsible ways with AI tools. So we have put in place a pretty lightweight set of guidelines. We've said, if you're going to share anything that's proprietary or any sort of personal, PII, personally identifiable information from our users, then there's a bunch of steps you have to go through. But if it doesn't involve proprietary information or personalized information, use whatever tool you want. You want to experiment with, Perplexity. You want to experiment with, Gemini. You want whatever you want to experiment with, go for it. And if you think there's value to then bringing it inside, our sort of, walls of proprietary data, then there's a process we'll go through with our security teams and, legal teams, et cetera, to make sure that it makes sense. But please experiment. And, we've been really encouraging people across the business to use these tools. So our legal team is using a tool to review contracts more effectively. Our people team is using a number of tools to streamline hiring. Our member experience team has had a lot of success with a tool that essentially understands the sentiment in a communication with a member. So is the member happy with how we're responding or frustrated? We can then use that for coaching. So I think encouraging that, that culture of experimentation, let's try things, is really, really important. I think where it's been harder so far, and I think when I talk to other CEOs, I think this is pretty common, is building the functionality into our consumer-facing experience has been a much bigger hill to climb versus finding internal, ways to use it internally to make our team more effective. And I think a lot of consumer facing businesses have found the same. What I'm really excited about, I think there was a view like 6 or 12 months ago that every consumer facing business needs like a chat bot where you can, as a consumer, ask questions like, why is my credit score up or down this month? And I guess I've come to believe that that's, not the best form factor for every business. I love Strava, which is an app for, athletes or wannabe athletes like me. And when you go for a run or go for a bike ride, Strava summarizes it into text. It'll say, wow, that was a slightly slower run than usual. You must be having a recovery day, Andrew, but keep it up. The heart rate was good. And I think that's like such a great example of a useful form factor. Like that's just so much more useful to me as a user than if I had to like ask a question like, how is the run or how is my heart rate? That little textual summary is actually a much better use of AI. And so I think we're seeing in the consumer realm, AI, Gen AI popping up in really exciting and interesting ways. And we're certainly thinking a lot about that as we build our own products and evolve the Borrowell experience for our members.
Awesome. Yeah. I think on the Goodfood side, probably our biggest use case so far has been on those like chat bots, right? Because we had a ton of like customer service interactions that would be just like repetitive interactions, right? Of like, where's my delivery? How do I skip a delivery next week or reschedule something? Things that are just repetitive and not the best use of humans to respond to it. So we started off with a bot, like you mentioned, which was pretty much like a decision tree, right? Like pre-programmed steps and options. And then recently moved to a generative bot that's actually like building on itself and improving responses and interactions. And our customers actually love it. Like it's faster than what a human being could address a ticket. It helps save all the more interesting interactions for our team members. So they're happy with it because they're skipping a lot of the rote, repetitive tasks. So that's been an interesting use case for us, but agreed, I think it's very business specific, right? And it's very use case specific. So that's super interesting. Neil, we're pretty much closing out here, so maybe I'll let you ask some of the closing out questions here.
I think it'd be super fun, Neil, if I could push into a Gen AI model all my Goodfood orders over the last few years, and just sort of hear what sort of patterns it would come up with. It would probably say, like, look, you seem to really like pasta. You've ordered, pasta dishes, 40% of the time. You know what I mean? It seems like in the winter you gravitate towards heavier meals. Like, given that summer's coming, like I'd love to see what Gen AI would do with my order history on Goodfood.
Stay tuned. There may be some coming for sure. Yeah, it's something we think about, and going back to the data piece. Obviously, the quality of the data needs to be absorbable by the models to be able to kind of give this information. So the team is spending a lot of time thinking about the right structure and what's old, what's kind of good data, what needs to be captured. So a lot of good conversations around that today. And maybe one final question on the Borrowell side around the kind of current AI trajectory versus your machine learning models in the past. Like, knowing what you see as a trajectory of generative AI and language models today, does that change how you guys are investing in machine learning? Does it accelerate the product development cycle? Does it, negate some of the work that you've done? Does it improve it? Like, how does it kind of those two spheres overlap?
So we think about that a lot, and I think in my mind the jury is still out. I think certainly my view today is that the machine learning approach can yield big benefits, but on the other hand, using Gen AI, essentially calling out to Gen AI in code, maybe in many cases faster and have other advantages, versus that machine learning approach, which requires more standardized data. It can be harder to query and say, well, why did you make this recommendation? A machine learning model can often be very hard to query. Whereas, what if we just took all of that some of that same information and pushed it to a Gen AI model and said, you could imagine an automatic, query that says, okay, Jonathan has just logged in. Here's Jonathan's credit history over the last, 5 logins. Here's a sense of what his credit report looks like. Last time he was here, he looked at these different bank accounts. Please recommend, the following, please recommend top 3 picks for Jonathan. And then just like let that Gen AI model do its thing. And you can even query it and say, well, why did you recommend, what drove your recommendations for Jonathan? And, most models you could make that sort of inquiry and it would give you an answer. So I think that sort of approach, which can be messier, is potentially really exciting. You don't need the same level of standardization and cleanliness that you would in a machine learning environment.
Amazing. Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of use cases similar to what you're talking about with the Strava use case, or even when you query ChatGPT or prompt ChatGPT now, they'll always give you 3 answers on the back end of your question to say, do you want me to do this, this, or this? And it's like, oh well, usually 1 or 2 of them are things that I wouldn't even have thought the model was capable of telling me, or I wouldn't have thought that I needed. And so it just kind of helps you be a better user of the product. And I'm sure you guys built a whole education piece around what is your credit score? How do you improve it? Why is it important? How do you avoid screwing it up? And so I'm sure there's just an infinite number of questions and combinations of products and situations and life choices that can be really, really helpful to Canadians. So excited to see how that kind of comes to life.
Awesome. Us too.
As we wrap up, we always like to ask, given that we're a food company, and Andrew, you've eaten a lot of good food meals over the past years, as you mentioned, so appreciative of that. If you could have a meal with one person, who would the person be, and what would the meal?
So I was thinking about this ahead of time. So one of my heroes in life was my grandfather on my mother's side, who was very successful in a number of ways in business and so forth. But more than that, he was just a great human being, and passed away, I guess, almost 2 decades ago now. And he's someone I think about and miss every day. So I'd love to be able to have one more meal with him. Life's funny that way. You never know when it's going to be your last time to be able to do something, or you rarely know. And I'd love to have one more meal with him. And we used to always, as I was growing up and I would visit him as a kid, we'd always have ice cream together. So I'd love to have a bowl of ice cream with him. I know that at Goodfood you do some great desserts, maybe ice cream and whatever else you'd recommend would be my choice to sit down with my grandfather.
I think my 4-year-old daughter is going to be very excited to hear you put ice cream in the meal category. Amazing. Well, thanks so much, Andrew. It's been a pleasure chatting with you, and I think our audience is going to love the in-depth conversation on unlocking data, personalization, using AI both within the business to build customer experiences, but also to build the business, and hearing about some of the early decisions that you had to have a lot of courage to make around product market fit and pivoting to different business models. So this has been a real pleasure. We would encourage everyone listening to check out Borrowell and play around with the free credit score and see what kind of recommendations you get, and let us know how you like them. And you can follow Andrew on LinkedIn. We'll have a link to his profile in the show notes. And until next time, thanks for listening to $100 Million Blueprint, and keep building.
That's all for today's episode of $100 Million Blueprint. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. It really helps us spread the word to other entrepreneurs and business leaders who need to hear these stories.
Want more behind-the-scenes insights, exclusive content, or have a business question you want answered? Connect with us on LinkedIn to find out more.
Also, don't forget to subscribe and follow $100 Million Blueprint, and to share this episode with your network if you found it valuable, because we're all about growing together. Remember, building a business is tough, but with the right blueprint, you can scale authentically and sustainably.
Thanks again for listening. Keep pushing forward, and we'll see you next time on $100 Million Blueprint.